November 18th, 1902. My dear Mary, you have made me a most beautiful and interesting present, and I thank you heartily for the lavish liberality and trouble of the same. It arrived this A Roman 1000 swathed like a mummy of the pharaohs, and is a monument to the care and skill of every one concerned. The photographer has retouched the impression, rather too freely, especially the eyes if one could but keep their hands off, but the image has a pleasing ghostliness as out of the far past, and affects me pathetically, as if it were of the dead-off one, who died young and innocent. Well, so he did, and I can speak of him, or admire him, poor charming, slightly mawkish youth, quite as I would another. I remember it, now all comes back to me, when and where I was so taken at the age of 20, though I look younger, and at a time when I had had an accident and injury to my back, and was rather sick and sorry. I look rather as if I wanted propping up, but you have propped me up now handsomely for all time, and I feel that I shall go down so to the remotest posterity. There is a great Titian, you know, at the Louvelham Gant, but I in my gloved gentleness shall run him close. All thanks. Again, then you have renewed my youth for me, and diverted my antiquity, and I really, as they say, fancy myself, and am yours, my dear Mary, very constantly. Henry James, to W. Roman 500 Howells. Lamb House Rye, December 11th, 1902. My dear Howells, nothing more delightful, or that has touched me more closely even to the spring of tears, has befallen me for years literally, than to receive your beautiful letter of Nov 30th, so largely and liberally, anent the W of the Roman 500. Every word of it goes to my heart. And to thank you for it seems a mere grimace. The same post brought me a letter from dear John Hay, so that my measure has been full. I haven't known anything about the American notices, heaven save the mark, any more than about those here, which I am told, however, have been remarkably genial, so that I have not had the sense of confrontation with a public more than usually childish. I mean, had it in any special way. I confess, however, that that is my chronic senseth more than usual childishness of publics, and it has been in my mind long since discounted, and my work definitely insists upon being independent of such phantasms, and on unfolding itself wholly from its own innards. Of course, in our conditions, doing anything decent is pure disinterested, unsupported, unrewarded heroism. But that's in the day's work. The faculty of attention has utterly vanished from the general Anglo-Saxon mind, extinguished at its source by the big blatant bayadere of journalism of the newspaper, and the picture above all magazine, who keeps screaming, look at me, I am the thing, and I only the thing that will keep you in relation with me all the time, without your having to attend 1 minute of the time. If you're moved to write anything anywhere about the W of the Roman 500, do say something of that teat. So awfully wants saying. But we live in a lovely age for literature, or for any art but the mere visual illustrations, loud simplifications, and grossissements. The big building good for John, the mounted play, the prose that is careful to be in the tone of, and with the distinction of a newspaper or bill poster advertisement. These, and these only meseem stand a chance. But why do I talk of such chances? I am melted at your reading N. Famia, the sacred fount, which you will, I fear, have found chaff in the mouth, and which is one of several things of mine in these last years that have paid the penalty of having been conceived only as the short story that alone, apparently, I could hope to work off somewhere, which I mainly failed of, and then grew by a rank force of its own, into something of which the idea had modestly never been to be a book. That is essentially the case with the SF planned, like the spoils of Poynton, what Macy knew the turn of the screw, and various others, as a story of the 8 to 10,000 words, and then having accepted its bookish necessity or destiny, in consequence of becoming already at the start 20,000, accepted it ruefully and blushingly. Moreover, since given the tenuity of the idea, the larger quantity of treatment hadn't been aimed at. I remember how I would have chucked the sacred fount at the 15,000 word, if in the first place I could have afforded to waste 15,000, and if, in the second, I were not always ridden by a superstitious terror of not finishing for finishings, and for the precedent's sake, what I have begun I am a fair coward about dropping, and the book in question, I fear, is more than anything else a monument to that superstition. When if it meets my eye, I say to myself, you know, you might not have finished it. I make the remark not in natural reproach, but I confess in craven relief. But why am I thus grossly expatiative on the airy carpet of the bridal altar? I spread it beneath Pilla's feet with affectionate jubilation and gratification, and stretch it out further in the same spirit beneath yours and her mother's. I wish her, and you, and the floral-minded young man, he must be a good all joy in the connection. If he stops short of gathering samphire, it's a beautiful trade, and I trust he will soon come back to claim the redemption of the maiden's vows. Please say to her from me that I bless her heart. Your visit to Cambridge makes me yearn a little, and you're watching over it with Roman 100N, and you're sitting in it with grace did the ghost of other walks I'm told, fresh pond, is no longer a pond, or no longer fresh only stale, or something ever brush you with the hem of its soft shroud haven't you? Lately published some volume of literary essays or portraits, since the heroines of fiction, and want you munificently send me either that, or the heroines neither of which have sprung up in my here, so rustic path, I will send you in partial payment, another book of mine, to be published on February 27th. Good night with renewed benedictions on your house and your spirit. Yours always and ever. Henry James. To Madame Paul Burgett. Lamb House Rye. January 5th, 1903. Dear Madame Paul, very welcome, very delightful to me, your kind New Year's message, and meeting a solicitude for news of you both, which was as a shadow across my not very glowing, indeed Christmas hearth. Your note finds me still incorrigibly rustic. I have been spending here the most solitary Christmastide of my life, absolutely solitary, and I have not for long months been further from home than for an occasional day or two in London. I go there on the 10th to remain till May, but I am sorry to say I see little hope of my being able to peregrinate to far provincial benignant, though your invitation be, we must meet some time again in the loved Italy. But I blush almost to say it when I have to say at the same time that my present prospect of that bliss is of the smallest I long unspeakably to go back there before I descend into the dark deep tomb for a long visit of upwards of a year, yet it proves more difficult for me than it ought or than it looks. And in short, I ought to speak of it again, save to announce it as definite unfortunately. I also want to return for a succession of months to the land of my birth also, in anticipation of the tomb. And the one doesn't help the other. Europe has ceased to be romantic to me, and my own country, in the evening of my days, has become so, but this senile passion too is perhaps condemned to remain platonic. Burgett's benevolence continues to shine on me, his generosity to descend, in the form of heavenly blue, volumes the grave smile of my dull library shelves, for which I blush that I make so meager returns. I shall send you a volume in February, but it will have no such grand allure, though the best thing in it will be a little story of which you gave me long ago at Torquay the motive, and which I will mark. I congratulate you on not being absentees from your Highwallet or Muchwald Eden, and I hope it means a happy distillation for Burgett, and much health and peace. For both of you may you have a mild and merciful year deserve it, by continuing to have patience twos lest you, with your very faithful and very inky old friend. Henry James. To Mrs. Waldo Story. The book to which the following refers is, of course, William Wetmore Story and His Friends, published in 1903. Dictated. Lamb House Rye. Jan 6, 1903. Dear Mrs. Waldo, let my first word be to ask you to pardon this vulgar machinery, and this portentous legibility, the fruit of dictation in the first place now made absolutely necessary to me, and the fruit, in the second place, of the fact that pegging away, as I am at present in your interest and Waldo's, and with the end of our business now, I am happy to say well in sight I so live as it were from day to day, and from hour to hour by the aid of this mechanism, that it is an effort to me to break with it, even for my correspondence. I had promised myself to write you so that you should receive my letter on the very Capo di Anno. And if I had then overcome my scruple as to launching at you a dictated thing, you would some time ere this have been in possession of my news. I have delayed till now, because I was every day hoping to catch the right moment to address you a page or two of my own proper hieroglyphics. But one's Christmastide burden of writing here is heavy. I didn't snatch the moment. And this is a brave precaution, lest it should again elude me, which in the interest of lucidity please again forgive. So much as that about a minor matter, the more important one is that, as you will both be glad to know, I have, in spite of a most damnable interruption of several weeks, this autumn a detested compulsion to attend for the time to something else, got on so straight with the book that 3/4 of it are practically written, and 4 or 5 weeks more will see me, I calculate, at the end of the matter. All the material I received from you has been of course highly useful, indispensable, yet none the less all of it put together was not material for a biography. Pure and simple, the subject itself didn't lend itself to that, in the strict sense of the word, and I had to make out for myself what my material did lend itself to. I have, I think, made out successfully, and happily, if I haven't, at any rate, it has not been for want of a great expenditure of zeal, pains, taste, though I say it who shouldn't, and talent, but the book will without doubt be an agreeable, and in a literary sense, really artistic and honorable one. I shall not have made you all so patiently, amiably, admirably wait so long for nothing. I have looked at the picture, as it were given me by all your material, as a picturesque image, or evocation charming heterogeneous, and a little ghostly, of a great cluster of people, a society practically extinct with Mr. and Mrs. Story, naturally all along the center the pretext, so to speak. And the point d'appui this course was the only one open to mate was imposed with absolute logic. The book was not makeable at all unless I used the letters of other people, and the letters of other people were usable with effect only so far as I could more or less evoke and present the other people. But I am writing you at hideous lengthhand, crowding out all space for matters more personal to ourselves. When once the book is out, I shall need exceedingly to see you all, and I don't think that unless some morbid madness settles on me, I shall fear to, but that is arrangeable, and shall be arranged my blessing on all of you. Yours, dear Mrs. Waldo, most faithfully. Henry James. To W. Roman 500 Howells. The ambassadors began at length to appear in the North American Review January 1903, where it ran throughout the year. Dictated. Lamb House Rye. Jan 8, 1903. My dear Howells, let me beg you first of all not to be disconcerted by this chill legibility. I want to write to you today immediately, your delightful letter of Dec 29th having arrived this morning, and I can only manage it by dictation, as I am, in consequence of some obscure indiscretion of diet yesterday, temporarily sick, sorry, and seedy, so that I can only loll rather listless, but already better of my poison in an armchair. My feelings don't permit me to wait to tell you that the communication I have just had from you surpasses for pure unadulterated charm any communication I have ever received. I am really quite overcome and weakened by your recital of the generous way in which you threw yourself into the scale of the arrangement touching my so long unserialized serial, which is manifestly so excellent a thing for me. I had begun to despair of anything when abruptly this brightens the view, for I like extremely the place the NAR makes for my novel. It meets quite my ideal in respect to that isolation and relief one has always fondly conceived as the proper due of one's productions, and yet never amid the promiscuous petticoats and other low company of the usual magazine table-off contents, seen them in the remotest degree. Attended with one had dreamed in private fatuity that one would really be the better for standing out a little, but one had to one's own sense never really stood at all, but simply lain very flat for the petticoats, and all the foolish feet aforesaid to trample over with the best conscience in the world. Charming to me also is the idea of your own beneficent paper, in the same quarter the complete detachment, of which, however, from the current fiction itself, I equally apprehend and applaud, just as I see how the not qualified editorial mind would indulge one of its most characteristic impulses by suggesting a connection. Never mind suggestion, sand, how you echo one of the most sacred laws of my own effort, toward wisdom, in not caring to know the source of that one, I care to know nothing, but that your relation to my stuff as it stands gives me clear joy within a couple of days. Moreover, your 3 glorious volumes of illustrated prose have arrived to enrich my existence, adorn my house, and inflame my expectations with many things pressing upon me at this moment, as preliminary to winding up here, and betaking myself, till early in the summer to London. My more penetrative attention has not yet been free for them, but I am gathering for the swoop. Please meanwhile be tenderly thanked for the massive and magnificent character of the gift. What a glorious quantity of work it brings home to me, that you do. I feel like a hurdy-gurdy man, listening outside a cathedral to the volume of sound poured forth there by the enthroned organist. But good night, my dear Howells, with every feeble-breathed but forcibly good wish of yours always and ever. Henry James. To William James. The special business that H.J. hints at in connection with his projected visit to America was to be the arrangement for a collected edition of his works, a scheme that was now beginning to take shape with regard to another allusion in this letter. It may be said that the threatened destruction of the old cottages a few yards from Lamb House was averted. Dictated. Lamb House Rye, May 24th, 1903. Dearest William, how much I feel in arrears with you let this gross machinery testify, which I shamelessly used to help to haul myself into line. However, you have most beneficently from of old given me free license for it, other benefits unacknowledged. As yet have I continued to receive from you. I think I've been silent even since before your so cheering about yourself letter from Asheville, followed a few days before I left town, which I did 5 days ago, by your still more interesting and important one of May 3D, in answer to mine dealing so tentatively with the question of my making plans, so far as complicatedly and remotely possible, for going over to you for 6 or 8 months. There was when I Rotino conceivability of my doing this, for a year at least, to come before August 1904, at nearest. But it kind of eases my mind to thresh the idea out sufficiently to have a direction to tend to meanwhile, and an aim to work at it, is in fact a practical necessity for me des. Maintain it to know whether or no I absolutely want to go if, and when I can such a difference in many ways more, than I need undertake to explain do the prospect of going, and the prospect of not going make luckily for myself. I do already, as I feel, quite adequately remain, convinced that I shall want to whenever I can, that is if I don't put it off for much more than a year after, which period I certainly shall lose the impulse to return to my birthplace, under the mere blight of incipient senile decay. If I go at all, I must go before I am too old, and above all, before I mind being older. You are very dissuasive, even more than I expected, but I think it comes from your understanding even less than I expected the motives, considerations, advisabilities, etc., that have gradually, cumulatively, and under much study of the question, much carefully invoked light on it, been acting upon me. I want undertake just now to tell you what all these reasons are, and how they show to mefer there is still plenty of time to do that. Only I may even at present say that I don't despair of bringing you round in the interval, if what is beyond the interval can realize itself to a better perception of my situation. It is roughly, and you will perhaps think too cryptically speaking, a situation for which 6 or 8 months in my native land shine before me as a very possible and profitable remedy. And I don't speak not by book simply and supinely to shrink in mere grounds of general fear, and encouraged shockability to me, all the air of giving up, chucking away, without a struggle, the one chance that remains to me in life of anything that can be called a movement, my one little ulam of possible exotic experience, such experience as may convert itself through the senses, through observation, imagination, and reflection, now, at their maturity, into vivid and solid material, into a general renovation of one's too monotonized grabeg. You speak of the whole matter, rather it seems to me, of vater a's you make comparatively, and have always made so many movements. You have traveled and gone to, and frolways comparatively so often. And so much I have practically never traveled at all, having never been economically able to. I've only gone for short periods, a few timesso, much fewer than I've wanted to Italy. Never anywhere else that I've seen everyone about me here, who is, or was anyone perpetually making for these visions. I've had one by one all to give up Spain, Greece, Sicily, any glimpse of the East, or in fact of anything, even to the extent of rummaging about in France, even to the extent of trudging about a little Switzerland. Counting out my few dips into Italy, there has been no time at which any abroad was financially convenient or possible. And now more and more all such adventures present themselves in the light of mere agreeable luxuries, expensive and supererogatory, inasmuch as not resolving themselves into new material or assimilating, with my little acquired stock, my accumulated capital of, for convenience, international items and properties. There's nothing to be done by me any more in the way of writing de chic, little worthless superficial poncif articles about Spain, Greece, or Egypt. They are the sort of thing that doesn't work in at all to what now most interests me, which is human Anglo-Saxonism, with the American extension or opportunity for it, so far as it may be given me still to work the same. If I shouldn't, in other words, bring off going to the US, it would simply mean giving up for the remainder of my days all chance of such experience as is represented by interesting travel, and which in this special case of my own would be much more than so represented. Granting the travel to be American, I should settle down to a mere mean oscillation from here to London, and from London herewith, nothing to speak of left more to happen to me in life, in the way of the poetry of motion that spreads before me. As for mind, imagination, special professional labor, a thin, starved, lonely, defeated, beaten prospect, in comparison with which your own circumjurations have been, as the adventures of Marco Polo or H. Roman 1000 Stanley. I should like to think of going once or twice more again, for a sufficient number of months, to Italy, where I know my ground sufficiently to be able to plan for such quiet work there as might be needfully involved. But the day is past when I can write stories about Italy with a mind otherwise preoccupied my native land, which time, absence, and change have in a funny sort of way made almost as romantic to me as Europe in dreams, or, in my earlier time here, used to be actual bristling, as fearfully bristling, as you like USA have the merit and the precious property that they meet and fit into my creative preoccupations, and that the period there, which should represent the poetry of motion, the one big taste of travel not supremely missed would carry. With it also possibilities of the prose of production, that is, of the production of prose, such as no other mere bought paid for skeptically and half-heartedly worried through adventure by land or sea, would be able to give me my primary idea in the matter, is absolutely economic hand, on a basis that I can't make clear to you now, though I probably shall be able to later on, if you demand it, that is if you also are accessible to the impression of my having any professional standing labas, big enough to be improved on I am not thinking I'm sure vaguely or blindly, but recognizing direct intimations, when I take for granted some such chance as my personal presence there would conduce to improve, I don't mean by its beauty or brilliancy, but simply by the benefit of my managing for once in my life, not to fail to be on the spot your allusion to an American agent as all sufficient for any purpose I could entertain doesn't for me begin to cover the ground which is antecedent to. That altogether, it isn't in the least a question of my trying to make old copyrights pay better, or look into arrangements actually existing, it's a question, well, of too much more than I can go into the detail of now or much, rather into the general and comprehensive truth of, or even than I can ever do so long as I only have. From you doubt what you say of the eggs of the vocalization of the shocks in general, and of everything else, is utterly beside the market being absolutely for all that class of phenomena, and every other class that I nurse my infatuation, I want to see them. I want to see everything, I want to see the country scarcely a bit new. York and Boston, but intensely, the Middle and Far West and California, and the South in cadres as complete and immeasurably more mature than those of the celebrated Taine, when he went early in the 60s to Italy for 6 weeks in order to write his big book moreover besides the general professional. I have thus a conception of have really indefinite view there hangs before me a very special other probability which, however, I must ask you to take on trust, if you can, as it would be a mistake for me to brood it at all abroad, as yet to make anything of this last mentioned business. I must be on the spot, I mean, not only to carry the business out, of course, but to arrange in advance its indispensable basis. It would be the last of follies for me to attempt to do that from here I should simply spoil my chance, so you see what it all comes to roughly state that the 6 or 8 months in question are all I have to look to unless I give up the prospect of ever stirring again. They are the only stir I shall ever be able to afford, because though they will cost even a good bit, they will bring in a great deal more in proportion than they will cost anything else other than a mere repeated, and too aridly Anglo-American winter in Florence perhaps, say, would almost only cost but enough of. All this I am saying have said much more than I meant to say at the present date. Let it at any rate simmer in your mind, if your mind has any room for it. And take time above all if there is any danger of your still replying adversely. Let me add this word more, however, that I mention August 1904, very advisedly if I want and. It's half the battle to go to the west and south, and even dreamably to Mexico. I could not do these things during that part of the summer, during which besides feeling I fear, very ill from the heat, I should simply have to sit still. On the other hand, I should like immensely not to fail of coming in for the whole American autumn, and like hugely in especial to arrive in time for the last 3 or 4 weeks of your stay in Chocorohitch. I suppose I should do, if I quitted this by about mid-August. Then I should have the music of Tout La Lyre coming away, after say 3 or 4 spring weeks at Washington, the next April or May, but I must stop. These castles in Spain all hang by the thread of my finding myself, in fact, economically able 14 months hence to face the music. If I am not, the whole thing must drop. All I can do meanwhile is to try and arrange that I shall be, I am scared, rather well in advance be the vision of American expenses, but the special possibility that shines before me has the virtue of covering potentially all that. One thing is very certain, I shall not be able to hoard by staying with people. This will be impossible to me, though I will assuredly, by a rich and rare exception, dedicate to you and Alice as many days as you will take me in for, whether in country or town. Basta. I talk of your having room in mind, but you must be having at the present moment little enough for anything save your Emerson speech, which you are perhaps now, for all I know, in the very act of delivering this morning's Times, has, in its American dispatch, an account of the beginning, either imminent or actual, of the commemoration, and, I suppose, your speech is to be uttered at Concord Wood. To God, I could sit there entranced by your accent side by side, I suppose, with the genial Bob. May you be floated grandly over your cataract be, which I don't mean have any manner of fall, but only be a Niagara of eloquence, all continuously, whether above or below the rapids, you will send me, I devoutly hope, some report of the whole thing. It affects me much even at this distance. And in this, so grossly alien Erthai's overt dedication of dear old Emerson to his immortality, I hope all the attendant circumstances will be graceful and beautiful. I came back hither, as I believe I have mentioned some 6 days ago, after some 18 weeks in London, which went this time very well, and were very easy on my present extremely convenient basis. To manage the spring here till within a week has been backward and blighted. But summer has arrived at last with a beautiful jump, and rye is quite adorable in its outbreak of greenery and blossom. I never saw it more lovely than yesterday, a supreme summer, early summer Sunday. The dear little charm of the place at such times consoles me for the sordid vandalisms that are rapidly disfiguring, and that I fear will soon quite destroy it. Another scare for me just now is the threatened destruction of the two little charmingly antique silver-grey cottages on the right of the little vista that stretches from my door to the church, too, that you may remember, just beyond my garden wall, and in one of which my gardener has lately been living. They will be replaced if destroyed by a pair of hideous cheap modern workingman's cottage, so horrid inhuman stab at the very heart of old Rye. There is a chance it may be still averted, but only just a bare chance. One would buy them in a moment to save them, and to save one's little prospect. But one is naturally quite helpless for that, and the price asked is impudently outrageous, quite of the blackmailing order. On the other hand, let me add, I'm gradually consoling myself now for having been blackmailed in respect to purchase of the neighboring garden. I wrote you of now that I have got it, and feel the value of the protection. My greater peace seems almost worth the imposition. This, however, is all my news, except that I have just acquired by purchase a very beautiful and valuable little dachshund pup of the red species, who has been promising to be the joy of my life up to a few hours since he began to develop a mysterious and increasing tumefication of one side of his face, about which I must immediately have advice. The things my dogs have, and the worries I have in consequence, I already see this one settled beneath monumental alabaster, in the little cemetery in the angle of my garden, where he will make the fifth. I have heard most happily from Billy at Marburg. He seems to fall everywhere blessedly on his feet, but you will know as much and more about him than Roman one. I am already notching off the days, till I hope to have him here in August. I count on his then staying through September. But goodbye with every fond view. I delight in the news of Alec's free wild life, and also of Peggy's, which the accounts of her festivities, feathers, and frills in a manner reproduce. For me, tender love to Alice. I embrace you all and am always yours. Henry James. To Miss Violet Hunt. Dictated. Lamb House Rye. Aug. 26th, 1903. Dear Violet Hunt, I am very backward with you being in receipt of more than one unanswered communication. Please set this down to many things, not least my having ever since you were here been carrying on uninterruptedly a small but crowded hotel. I have still all the same to thank you for the photographs of the admirable little niece, one of which, the one with the hat, I retain, sending the other back to you, if not by this very post, then at least by the very next. Both are very pleasing, but no photograph does much more than rather civilly extinguish the life and bloom, so exquisite a thing, in a happy child's face. Also came the Shakespeare book back, with your accompanying letter, for which also thanks, but to which I can't now pretend to reply. You rebound lightly, I judge, from any pressure exerted on you by the author, but I don't rebound. I am a sort of haunted by the conviction that the divine William is the biggest and most successful fraud ever practiced on a patient world. The more turn him round and round, the more he so affects me. But that is all. I am not pretending to treat the question, or to carry it any further. It bristles with difficulties, and I can only express my general sense by saying that I find it almost as impossible to conceive that Bacon wrote the plays as to conceive that the man from Stratford, as we know the man from Stratford, Roman 999. For the rest, I have been trying to sit tight and get on with work that has been much retarded these 2 months, and much interrupted and blighted. I hope you will be able to give me, when we next meet, as good an account of your adventures and emotions. I have taken again the liberty of this machinery with you, for having broken in your great amiability. I don't want to waste my advantage wherever you are buon divertimento. I really hope for you that you are in town, which has resources and defenses against this execrable August that the bare bosom of nature, as we mainly know it here, sadly lacks. Believe me, yours always, Henry James. To W. E. Norris. Lamb House Rye. September 17th, 1903. My dear Norris, your letter from the unpronounceable Japanese steamer is magnificent, so appreciated, and so felt that it really almost has an effect contrary to the case, It incidentally urges, effect of undermining my due disposition, to write to you your adventures by land, and see your commerce with the great globe your grand imperial and cosmic life hover before me on your admirable page, to make me ask what you can possibly want of the small beer of any chronicle of mine, my beer always to my sense of the smallest sinks, to positively ignoble dregs, in the presence of your splendid record of, which I think also I am even moved to assert humiliated jealousy all this and heaven to all this in letters from Lamb House, rye into the bargain that slightly sore sense has in fact been at the bottom of my failure to write to you altogether, and a wholly blank mind as to where to address catch or otherwise waylay, you frankly really, I seem to imagine you out of tune very naturally, and inevitably with our lives and only saying to yourself that you would have quite enough of them on getting back to them, and finding them creep along as tamely as ever. Let me hasten to add that I now rejoice to learn that you have actually missed the sound of my voice, the scratch of my poor pen, and I sit down as promptly almost as you enjoined to prepare a message, which shall overtake you, or meet you somewhere. May it not have failed of this before we you sternly I guiltily are confronted your appeal scented with all the spices of the East, and the airs of the Antipodes arrived in fact 4 or 5 days ago, and would have had my more instant attention if the world in these days, the small world of my tiny point on the globe, were not inconveniently and oppressively, with me making great holes in my all too precious, my all too hoarded and shrunken treasure of time. We have had an execrable and infamous summer of rain, endless rain, and wild wintry, tempest the very worst of my long lifetime. But it has not in the least stayed the circulation of my countrypopple in particular, and I have been running a small, crammed, and wholly unlucrative hotel for their benefit without interruption ever since I returned here from London, the middle of May, as I have to run it socially, and personally speaking all unaided and alone, I am always in the breach, and my fond dream of this place as a little sheltered hermitage is exposed to rude shocks. I am just now, in short, receiving a fresh shock every day, and the end is so far from being in sight that the rest of this month, and the replete form of October loom before me, as truly formidable, this once comparatively quiet corner, as it is impossible to doubt quite changed its convenient little character since I first knew and adopted it, and has become for the portion of the year, for which I most so prized it, a vulgarly bustling rendezvous of indiscreet and inferior people. I don't so qualify my own visitors, poor dear Sput, the total effect of these harried and haunted months, whereof the former golden air has been turned to tinkling brass. It all makes me glad I am old, and thereby soon to take leave of a world in which one is driven unoffending from pillar to post. You see, I don't pretend to take up your wondrous tale, or to treat you to responsive echoes and ejaculations. It will be delightful to do so when we meet again, and I can ask you face to face the thousand questions that your story calls to my lips. Let me even now, and thus however congratulate you with all my heart on such a fine bellyful of raw and other material, as your so varied and populated experience must have provided you with. All you have had to ingurgitate a bigger dose of salt water than I should personally care for, and I don't directly wish that any of your opportunities should have been mine. So wholly, with the lack of means to move, has the appetite for movement abandoned my aged carcass. But I applaud and enjoy the sight of these high energies in those who are capable and worthy of them, and distinctly like to think that there are quasi-contemporaries of longer wind and purse, and of stouter heart than mine. Though I am planning at last to go to the US for the first time for 21 years next summer, and remain there some 6 or 8 months. But there is time to talk of this. Your letter is full of interesting things that I can however send back to you no echo off, since, if I do, I shall still be writing it when you get back, and you will come and look at it over my shoulder, interesting above all your hints of your convictions or impressions, or whatever about the great colonial question, and the great Joseph's probable misadventurias, to which I find it utterly impossible to have a competent opinion. I have nothing but an obscure and superstitious sense that this country's fiscal attitude and faith has for the last half-century been superior and distinguished, and that the change proposed to her reeks probably with political and economical vulgarity. But that way just now madness lease you will find plenty of it when you get back. As to the probable date of that event, you give me no hint, but I look forward to your return with an eager appetite for your high exotic flavor, which please do everything further possible meanwhile to intensify, unless, indeed, the final effort of everything shall have been, as I shrewdly suspect, to make you more brutally British. You will even then anyway be an exceedingly welcome reappearance to yours always and ever, Henry James. To Howard Sturgis. The proof sheets in question were those of Mr. Sturgis' forthcoming novel Bellchamber. Lamb House Rye, November 8, 1903. My dear Howard, I send you back the blooming proofs with my thanks, and with no marks or comments at all in the first place, there are none of the marginal kind to make. And in the second place, it is too late to make them, if there were the thing goes on very solidly, and smoothly interesting, and amusing, as it moves very well written, well felt, well composed, well written. Perhaps, in particular, I am a bad person, really to expose fictitious work to I. As a battered producer and technician myself, have long since inevitably ceased to read with naivete. I can only read critically, constructively, reconstructively, writing the thing over if I can swallow it at all my way, and looking at it so to speak from within. But even thus I pass your book veritandly. There is only one thing that as a matter of detail I am moved to say, which is that I feel you have a great deal increased your difficulty by screwing up the social position of all your people so very high when a man is an English marquis, even a lame one. There are whole masses of marquisate things, and items a multitude of inherent detail in his existence which it isn't open to the painter to gaiet decur, not to make some picture of. And yet if I mention this because it is the place where people will challenge you, and to suggest to you therefore to expect it, if I do so, I am probably after all quite wrong. No one notices or understands anything, and no one will make a single intelligent or intelligible observation about your work. They will make plenty of others. What I applaud is your sticking to the real line and center of your themeth consciousness and view of Sainty himself. And you're dealing with things with the whole phantasmagoria, as presented to him, only not otherwise going behind them. And also I applaud, dearest Howard, your expression of attachment to him, who holds this pen, and passes it at this moment over very dirty paper. For he is extremely accessible to such demonstrations, and touched by them more than ever in his lonely more than maturity. Keep it up as hard as possible. Continue to pass your hand into my arm, and believe that I always like greatly to feel it. We are two who can communicate freely. I send you back also Temple Bar, in which I have found your paper a moving and charming thing, waking up the pathetic ghost, only too effectually, the ancient years and images, that I too more or less remember swarm up, and vaguely moan round about one like banshees, or other mystic and melancholy presences. It's all a little mystic and melancholy to me here when I am quite alone, as I more particularly am, after grand company has come and gone. You are essentially grand company, and felt as such, and the subsidence is proportionally flat. But I took a long walk with Max this grey still Sabbath afternoon, have indeed taken one each day, and am possessed of means, thank goodness, to make the desert of being quite to myself blossom like the rose. Good night. It's 12. The clock ticks loud, and Max snoozes audibly in the armchair. I lately vacated yours, my dear Howard, always and ever. Henry James. To Henry Adams. Henry Adams, the well-known American historian, was a friend of long standing. The following refers to H.J.'s recently published W.W. story and his friends. Lamb House Rye, November 19, 1903. My dear Adams, I am so happy at hearing from you at all that the sense of the particular occasion of my doing so is almost submerged and smothered. You did bravely well to make a note of the act for your future career, as belonging to a class of impulses to be precipitately obeyed, and if possible even tenderly nursed. Yet it has been interesting exceedingly in the narrower sense as well as delightful in the larger. To have your letter with its ingenious expression of the effects on you of poor W. Swith, whom, and the whole business of whom there is, yes, I can see a kind of inevitableness in my having made you squirmer, whatever is the proper name for the sensation engendered in you, very curious, and even rather terrible, this so far-reaching action of a little biographical vividness, which did indeed in a manner begin with me myself, even as I put the stuff together, though putting me to conclusions less grim, as I may call them, than in your case. The truth is that any retraced story of bourgeois lives other than great lives of action at encore, throws a chill upon the scene, the time, the subject, the small mapped out facts. And if you find great men thin, it isn't really so much their fault, and least of all yours, as that the art of the biographer, devilish arties, somehow practically thinning, it simplifies even while seeking to enrich, and even the immortal are so helpless and passive in death. The proof is that I wanted to invest dull old Boston with a mellow, a golden glow, and that for those who know like yourself, I only make it bleak and weak. Luckily those who know are indeed but 3 or 4, and they want, I hope, to promiscuously tell. Yours, my dear Adams, always and ever. Henry James. To Sir George O. Trevelyan. The second part of Sir George Trevelyan's American Revolution had just appeared at this time. Lamb House Rye, Nov 25th, 1903. Dear Sir George, I should be a poor creature if I had read your two last volumes, without feeling the liveliest desire to write to you. That is the desire you must have kindled, indeed, in more quarters than you will care to reckon with. But even this reflection doesn't stay my pen save to make me parenthise that I should be absolutely distressed to receive from you any acknowledgement of these few lines. This new installment of your admirable book has held me so tight from chapter to chapter that it is as if I were hanging back from mere force of appreciation, and yet I found myself as I read vibrating responsively in so many different ways that my emotions carried me at the same time all over the place. You, of course, know far better than I how you have dealt with your material, but I doubt whether you know what a work of civilization you are perpetrating internationally by the very fact of your producing so exquisite a work of art. The American, the Englishman, the artist, and the critic in Mito say nothing of the friend. All drink you down in a deep draught each in turn, feeling that he is more deeply concerned. But it is, of course, as with the other volume, the books being so richly and authoritatively English, so validly true, and yet so projected as it were into the American consciousness, that will help to build the bridge across the Atlantic. And I think it is the mystery of this large fusion carried out in so many ways that makes the thing so distinguished a work of art. Yet who shall say so familiarly when a thing is such a work of art? I mean, who shall say how it has by 1,000 roads got itself made so? It is this literary temperament of your work, this beautiful quality of composition and feeling of the presentation grasping reality, all the while, and controlling and playing with the detail. It is this, in our chattering and slobbering day, that gives me the sense of the ampler tread and deeper voice of the man, in fact, of his speaking in his own voice at all, or moving with his own step. You will make my own country people touch as with reverence the hem of his garment. But I think that I most envy you your having such a method at Allier, being able to see so many facts, and yet to see them each imaged and related and lighted as a painter sees the objects together that are before his canvas. They become, I mean, so amusingly concrete and individual for you, but that is just the inscrutable luxury of your book, and you bring home further to me, at least, who had never so fully felt it, what a difficult and precarious, and even mightn't they've been revolution, it was altogether, as a revolution wasn't it, as nearly as possible not being, that whatever else it might have been the tail, might in time have taken to wagging the dog, if the tail could only as seemed so easy, have been left on. But I didn't mean to embark on these reflections. I only wanted really to make you feel a little responsible for my being through living with you this succession of placid country evenings, far from the London ravage extravagantly agitated. But take your responsibility philosophically, recall me to the kind consideration of Lady Trevelyan, and believe me very constantly yours. Henry James,